All right, talking about gain. How big can you go? Not COVID lockdown weight gain. No, we're not talking about that. We are talking about signal gain. Amplitude, right? Signal to noise ratio and all of that stuff. The goal is to get a nice clean voiceover sound or recording sound or singing sound, whatever you're recording, and try to keep that noise to signal ratio as high as you can, and keep the noise down to a minimum. All right, so what are the issues? Well, the first issue is noise. And where does the noise come from? The noise comes from everywhere. It's coming through the wall, the window. You can hear my computer humming in the background at the moment. You got the ambient noise in the room, so those are reflections coming off the wall. And, it comes through the floors and the ceiling and the vents and whatever people are doing around you. And depending on how sensitive your mic is and how it is set, you might even hear cars roaring down the street or birds chirping at the window or things like that. So you have to isolate your sound. That's step one. And you can see I've got my homemade ISO booth in the background. And it's not professional, but it does a fair job of keeping some of the more common frequencies out of my space. And if I totally close it up and I put my shield on around the mic, it can be fairly quiet, and I can do a fairly good job of keeping the noise out of my recording. Another source of noise is things traveling through your cables and out of the circuitry of your devices. They all sort of produce a natural amount of noise that comes through, electricity passing along the line. And that means you need shielding. So unless you live in a Faraday cage or you have those really high quality, professionally treated rooms, you have to have good quality cables. That helps. Shielding, balanced, unbalanced, all of that stuff. And you have to keep those things in mind. Don't lay your cables across an electrical cable, that type of thing. And you can sometimes hear it in your headphones if you listen closely enough. And if you hear things like that, you might need to take steps to reduce that or get rid of it. So the other thing you have to consider is the types of microphone or which microphones you are using. And obviously, there are good and bad microphones. And most microphones these days, you can get, in a very economical way, a decent voiceover or vocal mic. And there are many choices out there. Some are USB powered, some are XLR input, some are 1/4 inch. There is a base level of quality you want to aim for, but you do the best with the budget that you have, and that's all you can do. Another consideration with microphones is whether you are using a condenser or a dynamic mic. And you hear people talk about this. And the general rule of thumb is dynamic mics are for stage, so that would be for musicians who are performing live, and condenser mics are for studios. And that is a general rule of thumb because it's generally true. But it's not a law. The gods won't strike you down if you break that law. You can certainly use a dynamic mic in a studio, and lots of people do for different reasons. So you might have a condenser mic like this. This is a TLM 103 studio condenser. It's decent quality. I like it. Works very well. But if I had this on this stand right now, you would hear everything going on around me. It's a very sensitive mic, and condenser mics sort of pick up everything. And therefore, you might want to consider just using a dynamic mic because they tend to do a better job of focusing the projection of the audio and keeping the other crap out. And that's why you use them on stage, because they're very directional and just sort of focus on one thing. So this is a dynamic mic, and this is a pretty standard one. I use it for miking amps, and a lot of sound people do the same thing. You can use an SM57, which is a pretty standard dynamic mic for stage. You don't see them used a lot for vocals. They're mostly used for miking things like drums and amps, and that's what I use it for. But I was watching a video of Iggy Pop the other day, and he was using it for vocals, so I guess it can be done in a certain way if you like that sound. And then you have the old workhorse, the SM58, which is also made by Shure, and most people use something along that line for vocals on stage. But there's nothing to say that you can't use them for recording. In fact, I think I heard once that Bono uses the SM58 for all of his recordings, and always has, because it sounds good, whatever. If it sounds good, it is good. That's the rule of thumb, right? So using a dynamic mic can help you keep some of that room noise out of your line. And dynamic mics tend to be a little more economical. To get a decent quality condenser is a lot more expensive than getting a decent quality dynamic mic, which you can get for used for less than $100 sometimes. So you can think about that. So the other issue you're going to have is the signal to noise ratio, just sort of the where the noise sits in the signal. So right now I'm using an unadulterated signal. I just have the mic going down a cable into my interface, into my computer, which is going into Logic Pro X. And it sounds decent enough. You can hear some of the noise. I can hear my computer in my headphones. I can hear some traffic outside. But it's acceptable. And I'm looking at the signal right here. And you can see it's got a fairly decent amount of signal compared to the noise, looking at the graphic. But nonetheless, it also depends on the person. You know, when you watch TV and you see the news, you know those people are trained to enunciate and pronounce things clearly, and they have projecting voices, and of course actors and announcers trained for this type of thing. And some people just have a naturally projecting voice, and it makes engineering these things a lot smoother and nicer because it doesn't create a lot of problems. But on the other hand, you might have somebody who talks like this, and they talk really quietly, or they're doing something that requires whispering, and you get, you know, there's no signal there, and so the noise is part of the signal, and as you try to amplify that, you're going to get that noise is going to go with it. And we're going to look at that in a little bit. You can of course get close to the mic, and if you watch people recording a podcast, you can see they put the mic right in front of them, and you'll see people using a lapel mic, and that's right here. And that helps to, of course, get the signal strong compared to the ambient sound. And that's one way to do it. But if you get too close, you've got a proximity problem and a popping problem. The signal gets muddy because the low frequencies dominate. And then you get a popping sound as the person is breathing into the mic, and that can create a problem. So you're trying to find that sweet spot for the person who is talking, and you have to adjust the levels, and this is what engineers do. And you might have to set it up for yourself and consider these things as you go. But today we're talking about gain, so we can't talk about gain without talking about gain boosters. And we're going to take a look at this one here. Is that going to focus? Please focus. Great. So this is the McBoost by Radial Engineering, and it sounds Scottish, but it's actually made in Canada. And there is a rumor going around that I just created that because it's made in Canada, all of the circuitry is soldered with maple syrup, and it smells like breakfast. Yes. I reached out to Radial for comment, but they refused to comment. So that means it's totally true. Radial is known for their DI boxes, and their, they produce very good quality stuff. And I'm not shilling for them. They're not sponsoring me or anything, but I use their products, so bully for me. There are other ones you can get. Fat Boy is one that's pretty common. It's a lot smaller and easier to handle. And what's the other one? Cloud Lifter is a pretty popular one as well. So you can check out any of those. And if you talk to musicians, a lot of them will have a booster pedal on their, like in their guitar rack or something like that, because a gain booster can just help you, pop that signal out through the sound, maybe if you're doing a lead, or get the lead vocals up above the rest of the mix. And so they do have that benefit. There are some downsides to them, of course, but generally they work well. This one has some bells and whistles that the other ones don't have. It allows you to adjust, you know, low level, high level, and then it's got a variable level, which is pretty nice because you can really dial in the level that you like based on what you see happening in your level meters. And then it has a load adjuster for different mics. You should go online and read about load adjustments because different mics have different loads, and you want to be able to match that for all particular reasons. And then it has a balanced and unbalanced XLR input-output, not quarter-inch. So you have to have XLR cables for that type of thing, which most of you would probably know anyway. All right, so what we're going to do is compare. I've been doing this introduction with an unadulterated signal. What I'm going to do now, pause. I'm going to put this in preamp into the line here and then see what happens. So hold on a sec. Okay, now you're sorry. Okay, so I've inserted the gain booster into the line. I didn't change anything else, and you can hear the immediate effects. That is a massive gain booth, and I'm redlined on everything. And you can see here the signal is clipping, so you don't want that. On the other hand, if you're doing some ASMR, you know, you've got your nice high gain. That was great. But if you're not doing ASMR, try to avoid that as much as possible. I'm sorry, that was probably really disturbing. With the unadulterated line, that's starting to hurt my ears, I had to pump the gain up here to 48, 49. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is just draw back that main input gain to something a little more reasonable. Okay. And you can see what levels I'm getting out here, right? -12 to -4. I can pull that back a little bit more. Okay. Generally, somewhere between -12 and -6 is a reasonable amount of headroom above the signal. Anything above that, you sort of lose space if you want to bump up the gain before you get into just loudness. But anything down in the, you know, if I bring this gain, input gain down even further, it helps to reduce the noise, which is good. You can't hear my computer humming because now it's overheating. I'm doing too much with it. And I'm still getting a decent signal, right? -15, that's usable. If I keep bringing this down, okay. I don't want to get down into the -20 range below that. Anything in that range is just going to blend with the noise that I'm creating and be unusable in post-production. Okay, so you're sort of seeing the issue there. What is happening is without the gain boost, I have to pump up the input gain, which adds a lot of noise to the line in order to get a reasonable signal. But if I add a gain booster, I can actually bring the input gain down, which will reduce the noise and still get a decent signal. Okay, and that's the benefit of them. They can give you a lot more flexibility to find that sweet spot where the signal to noise ratio is something you can manage in post-production. And you can do things like add some EQ to edge off some of those unwanted frequencies. So that's what I'm going to do now. What you're looking at here is my console for my Apollo Twin, which is my interface. There are many other apps you can use for preamps, and you can look into that. So let's watch what happens when I turn on the preamp. So some of those frequencies just changed, and that's because I've set it up that way. I can still hear my computer in the background. I don't know if you guys can, but it's coming through my headphones. Right, so what I have is a preamp, which is going between the microphone and the input signal. And I can pump up the input level here by 5, 10, or just bring it down to 0. And you'll hear those changes. Okay. 5 sort of works. And then I have a little bit of an EQ here where I can roll off some of the higher outside frequencies that you definitely don't want. So when you look here, you've got the low-end frequencies, 100, 200. Most people's voices don't go down into the 100 range, so you can just roll off that level, and it'll keep any low-end frequencies coming through the wall or a truck passing or something like that without creating any noise in that area. And then you can roll off some of the high-end frequencies. Of course, you can use a high and low pass filter, which I have here. Okay, this one comes with one already. But if I want to dial that in a little closer, I'm going to use some EQ here. And of course, you can add another EQ to the line and zero in on some of the problematic frequencies. Usually, you get something in the 7,000 to 10,000 range, and anything above that is just, you know, high-end noise. And if you EQ that and you sort of roll those down into the range of the speaker, it'll get rid of those frequencies you're not going to use. But if you get down into the 4,000 range, you're going to start hearing some of those high-end S's disappearing or muddying up, and then it loses the brightness. So you have to spend a little time working with EQ and try to learn to recognize, you know, when you've gone into the muddy zone, which means it's too MIDI, too low end, and there's no brightness. And you try to balance those two. Okay, and then you have a level input. You know, if I dial this up, it's like adding volume or gain to the signal, so you can hear the noise increasing. So be careful there. Again, you find a sweet spot where the noise disappears, but you're still getting a decent signal. And then you can actually ramp up the output. All right, but again, this is preamp, so these are just things I'm baking into my mix, into my original signal that I can deal with, and then I can add things later in post-production to clean it up a little bit. Okay, and there are a lot of theories about stuff like that, so if you're not sure what you're doing, do your research and do some practice. Yeah, and I'm certainly no expert on these things. I just know a little bit. There you go. So if we compare the graphical view of these frequencies, this is what I'm recording right now. Okay, and it's got a decent amount of headroom. It could be a little better. I would probably jack that up a bit, but it's fine for now. If I change it to this one, you'll notice this was the unadulterated signal, and it doesn't have as much clearance. And the noise is this space right here. Okay, you know, you'll see these that right there. And if I jack up the gain on that signal, which I can do in my software, okay, the noise comes with it, right? So if I've got hissing and some white noise bothering the overall signal, and I decide, oh, it's not loud enough, I want to get a little more gain out of that, and I jack it up, the noise is going to come with it in equal ratios. So that's just going to make it worse, and then you'll find, oh, I can't do that, I have to dial it back. So what are we looking at here? That's only 2 decibels. With such a low signal, even if I try to get an extra decibel out of it, which isn't going to make a huge amount of difference, but the noise will become much more audible. So then I crank it up, you know, try to add 10 decibels to the gain. Well, the noise goes with it, so it's just going to be unusable. All right, so if I look at where we started off with, this is the signal from the beginning, and you can see it's all clipped, and I had too much gain. And then if I roll it back, I get somewhere in the middle to try to find a little more clearance. And then as I fooled around with the levels, you can see it changing. You get these small levels here. So you get the idea. The point is you're trying to balance the equipment you're using with the person who is talking and the environment in which you are recording. And you make decisions about what is going to get you the sweetest sound for the the buck. As a ballpark, it's sort of generally accepted that minus 12 decibels is where you want to aim for in terms of the space where you have enough flexibility to work with in post-production. So before you master your final track and you bump up the levels on the output, you can aim for that area. -6 is possible sometimes too, but that's hard to get with vocals, with a voiceover, without getting too much noise. But if someone is singing, right, you can get up to -6 pretty easily, especially with a condenser mic. So I'm sure you guys are smart and you can figure out the point here. If you're attempting to do some streaming or recording or videos or anything like that, you have to balance the equipment you're using, the person you are recording, and the environment in which you are recording, and the ultimate output, the product that you would like to create. And then, of course, you have to work within your own budget and make decisions about what's best to spend your money on. Anyway, folks, I hope you found that useful. If you could do me all the usual favors of liking and subscribing, I would greatly appreciate it. If you got any questions or comments, please put it in the comment section. You know how that works. And thanks for stopping in today. We'll see you next time.